It was almost 8 o'clock at night, and as usual, I was the last one in the store. I stood there at the front counter, counting out the day's cash and trying not to let myself think too much. I'm 52 years old, managing my family's hardware store in this sleepy Indiana town. I've been here since I was 18, right after Mom died, and sometimes I wonder how the hell so many years slipped by unnoticed. Dad founded this place nearly half a century ago. Ray Evans, small-town success story, respected pillar of the community, father of two. Me, the steady, responsible daughter, and Todd, my charming but reckless little brother. Todd could do no wrong in Dad's eyes, even though I'd spent decades quietly cleaning up after his messes. On paper, I co-own the place. In reality, I'm invisible. Dad and Todd are the faces everyone knows. Todd barely shows up half the week, but he gets praise for every small thing he does. Me? I haven't had a vacation in 8 years. When I brought it up, Dad laughed and said, "Who'd run things if you weren't here?" I smiled then because that's what I always do, smile and nod, pretend everything's fine. But inside I felt something twist, something painful and familiar. Why can't he see me? Why do I have to beg for even a scrap of appreciation? Lately, I've felt a quiet dread creeping into my bones. Business has been slowing down. Suppliers keep calling about unpaid bills, and Dad brushes it off like it's nothing. Todd just shrugs and disappears whenever things get tense. It's probably temporary, I tell myself. Maybe things will go back to normal soon. But what if they don't? Tonight, as I locked the front door and stood alone beneath the flickering neon sign that spelled out, Evans Family Hardware, something finally cracked in me. I let the tears come quietly. Nobody would see anyway. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to hold everything together, believing that someday they'd notice, someday they'd finally say, "Thank you, Karen. We see you." But standing there alone, breathing in the cool night air, I realized how foolish that hope was. They never would. Maybe the problem was me. Maybe I'd stayed quiet too long. There was a time, not even that long ago, when running this store felt like a source of pride. I used to love Saturday mornings, when the bell above the door jingled nonstop, neighbors coming in with coffee in hand, stopping to chat while buying paint or garden tools. I knew everyone's names, their kids' birthdays, their projects. It felt good to be part of something, a living heart beating in this small town. Those were days when family dinners still meant something too. Dad would sit at the head of the table, bragging about how well Todd handled a big sale or how Todd charmed some vendor into giving us a better deal. He never mentioned that Todd only worked maybe 3 days a week while I opened and closed the store daily. But I smiled through it, quietly clearing plates and refilling drinks, hoping someday he'd see the real picture. Lately, though, those dinners had grown tense. Todd was constantly late, always mumbling excuses about meetings, but never explaining anything. Dad waved off my concerns like I was being dramatic. I could see his annoyance growing every time I brought it up, so eventually I stopped. I kept telling myself things would improve if I just worked harder, stayed patient, pretended everything was normal. But normal had slipped away without me noticing. Bills started piling up at the back of the office, hidden beneath mail Dad didn't open. Suppliers, people we'd known for decades, called almost daily, their patience wearing thin. I felt embarrassed, ashamed, but Dad would just scoff. They'll wait. They always do. Todd wouldn't even stay in the room if money was mentioned. And there was Joanne, my friend who ran the bakery next door. She'd always been good at reading me, even when I said nothing. The other day, she asked if everything was okay. I forced a smile and nodded, lying that we were fine. The quiet pity in her eyes stung. How obvious had it become? The worst part was how alone I felt. At night, staring at the ceiling, sleep evading me, I'd run through scenarios confronting Dad, pushing Todd to take responsibility, demanding answers. But I knew deep down I wouldn't. I'd lived too long pretending nothing was wrong, hoping problems would fix themselves if I just kept quiet. Now, I wasn't even sure what normal looked like anymore. Maybe it had never been real. Maybe the family dinners and bustling Saturdays were just something I'd imagined, a fragile illusion that hid the truth I'd never wanted to see. My family had stopped working a long time ago, and I was the only one holding the pieces together. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The store was empty, and I'd been sorting invoices when I noticed something strange. A sales slip tucked away in a drawer, hidden beneath an old catalog. I pulled it out, and my heart sank. It listed inventory items, lawn equipment, expensive power tools, sold at ridiculously low prices. The date was from 2 weeks earlier. My stomach twisted when I saw Todd's handwriting. I felt dizzy, but I forced myself to look further. There were more, several slips, all hidden away, each marking significant losses. Thousands of dollars had quietly vanished without me noticing. Why had Todd done this? And worse, why hide it? When Todd finally showed up that evening, I asked him quietly about the slips. He laughed, almost amused, telling me it was just a side deal with friends, nothing to worry about. But it didn't make sense. The store was already struggling. How could we afford such losses? I knew I had to talk to Dad. I rehearsed the words in my head over and over, convincing myself he'd understand, that this time he'd listen. When I showed him the slips, my hands shook slightly, betraying my nerves. Dad barely glanced at them before tossing them aside with a dismissive grunt. Todd knows what he's doing. Stop worrying so much, Karen. But we're losing money. I tried again, softer now, hating how my voice wavered. He looked at me coldly. You've always been too uptight about these things. Just let it go. Let it go. Like always. I walked away, shaken and confused. Doubt began to seep in. Was I really being paranoid, making too much of it? Maybe I'd misunderstood something. After all, they both seemed so sure, so calm. Was I really just overreacting? That night, sleep eluded me again. I lay in the dark, eyes wide open, replaying every detail. Todd's casual shrug, Dad's cold dismissal. I'd expected anger, or at least confusion from them, not ridicule. Not this quiet indifference. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. I'd always prided myself on being dependable, capable, level-headed. Now, lying awake in bed, I was questioning myself for the first time in my life. Maybe Todd was right. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe the problem really was me. After Dad dismissed my concerns, I tried desperately to believe he was right. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe Todd did have everything under control, and I was just being overly cautious. That had always been my role, the responsible one, the worrier, the uptight sister. To keep my anxiety at bay, I threw myself even harder into work. I reorganized shelves, stayed later, got up earlier. I smiled wider at customers, ignored the bills piling higher in the back office, hoping that by sheer willpower I could fix things without confronting anyone again. But the tension never fully left me. Every time Todd's phone buzzed, every whispered conversation between him and Dad sent my mind spinning with suspicion. But I kept my mouth shut. I'd learned early that speaking up just made things worse. Family dinners became almost unbearable. Todd now openly joked about how stressed I was, rolling his eyes when I gently reminded him of pending orders or unpaid invoices. Dad just nodded along, never acknowledging how much extra effort I was putting in. I felt myself shrinking smaller each time. And then came the gossip. Our town is small enough that rumors spread quickly, especially when they involve people like us, who've been around forever. One afternoon, Joanne from the bakery quietly mentioned she'd overheard a couple of our suppliers complaining. They were tired of chasing payments, wondering aloud if the Evans family was going broke. My face burned with shame. I quickly reassured her it was just a misunderstanding. Joanne nodded slowly, clearly unconvinced, but said nothing more. I hated lying to her, hated how much it hurt to pretend everything was fine. That night, I tried again to talk to Dad, gently asking if we should maybe sit down with Todd and discuss finances openly. Dad turned sharply, his voice colder than usual. We've been through this. Stop creating drama, Karen. Everything's under control. His words hit like a slap, silencing me instantly. I nodded, apologized softly, and went upstairs feeling humiliated. Alone in my room, my stomach churned. Was I really the problem here? Had I become so paranoid and negative that I was seeing issues where none existed? Lying awake, I replayed Dad's voice over and over. Stop creating drama. It echoed painfully, cutting deeper each time. Maybe that was my role, always the troublemaker, always the worrier. Maybe I'd been the difficult one all along, creating chaos in a family that just wanted peace. It was easier to believe that than to face the truth. So I buried my doubts again, pressing them deeper, hoping they'd just disappear. But they never did. They grew silently beneath my denial, waiting patiently until I couldn't ignore them anymore. I wish I could say it was courage or strength that made me dig deeper, but it was more like desperation. The truth finally forced its way into my life on a rainy Tuesday night when I stayed late to finish paperwork Dad had abandoned weeks ago. Sorting through the stacks of unopened mail, my hands froze as I found letters marked "Final Notice" in angry red ink. Foreclosure threats. Overdue payment warnings from banks I'd never even heard of. My heart started pounding painfully. With shaking fingers, I opened each letter. Our family store, the only thing I'd ever known, was mortgaged to the brink. Tens of thousands of dollars owed, money taken out against the building itself without my knowledge or consent. My eyes blurred with tears of shock and betrayal. Digging deeper, I found signed loan documents bearing Dad's unmistakable scrawl, with Todd's careless signature right next to it. They'd been quietly draining the store for months, maybe longer. Selling inventory cheap for quick cash, borrowing against the store's equity, leaving me completely in the dark. My stomach twisted into knots. How could they do this? Worse yet, how could I have missed it? Had I been so desperate for their approval that I'd ignored every red flag along the way? I felt sick. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal. Dad had trusted Todd, whose failures I'd quietly fixed for decades, while treating me like I was paranoid for worrying about unpaid bills. My whole life suddenly felt like one giant lie. When I finally left the store that night, the rain hid my tears. At home, I tried to confront Todd again, voice trembling, hoping he'd admit something, anything. Instead, he acted offended, called me delusional, accused me of making up stories to turn Dad against him. Dad watched quietly from the doorway, saying nothing as Todd berated me. His silence stung deeper than any insult. I'd hoped he'd stand up for me just once, even in this moment, but he didn't. I retreated to my room, feeling utterly alone, anger and confusion mixing painfully. I wanted to scream, wanted to break something, but all I could do was sit numbly in the dark. My family was collapsing, our business was dying, and I'd been blind to it all, willingly closing my eyes to protect a peace that never truly existed. Now, alone in my room, with the rain battering the window, there was no denying it anymore. The proof was right in front of me, painful and undeniable. My family had betrayed me, and I had let them. The final breaking point came without warning. A random Wednesday afternoon, I'd run out to pick up lunch and returned earlier than expected. Walking in through the back door of the store, I overheard voices drifting from the office. Dad and Todd, speaking casually, completely unaware I was there. I paused, just out of sight, suddenly alert. "We can sell it off quietly," Dad said calmly. "There's interest from a big box chain. They'll pay enough to clear the debts and leave us comfortable." "What about Karen?" Todd asked, sounding bored rather than concerned. Dad sighed irritably. "Karen? She'll get over it. She always does. Besides, she's got nowhere else to go. She'll land on her feet eventually." My breath caught sharply. Every word felt like a blade. My father, so dismissive, so certain I'd just get over it. That I'd quietly accept losing everything I'd spent my life building, everything I'd sacrificed for. Todd laughed lightly. "Yeah, she's always complaining anyway. Maybe it'll finally teach her to relax." Their laughter hit me like a physical blow. My knees felt weak. How could they talk about my life so casually, as if I didn't even matter? As if I were just an inconvenience? For years, I'd absorbed their insults and neglect, thinking loyalty meant silence.
"Ide tolerat a tots irresponsibility. That's coolness."
But standing there in that moment, everything shifted inside me. The denial shattered. No more excuses. No more quietly bearing the weight of their indifference. When I finally stepped into the office, my presence silenced them immediately. Dad looked startled, then quickly masked it with irritation. Todd's expression barely changed, mild annoyance flickering across his face. I said nothing at first, just stared at them, my voice frozen. Dad finally broke the silence, impatient and dismissive as always. "Karen, don't start." But something had changed in me. "Don't start." My voice trembled, anger and hurt woven together tightly. "You're planning to sell the store, my store, without even telling me, and I shouldn't start?" Dad rolled his eyes, ready to argue, but I raised my hand, silencing him. I heard everything, I whispered, fighting back tears. Everything. They stood there, silent now, but not ashamed, just irritated at being caught. In their eyes, I saw clearly how little I'd ever meant. My heart ached, but something else was building beneath the pain, a fierce determination, born from years of buried anger and resentment. My loyalty had been wasted. I'd given them everything, and they'd taken it without a second thought. As I turned to leave the room, I knew there was no turning back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just angry, I was ready to fight. After I confronted Dad and Todd, things spiraled quickly. Overnight, I became the villain in my own family drama, the bitter daughter, the ungrateful sister. They didn't waste time spinning their version of events, twisting the truth into something unrecognizable. Within days, my cousin stopped calling. My aunt, who'd always been kind, now looked away when she saw me at the grocery store. Friends I'd known since childhood grew distant, avoiding eye contact. Whispers followed me everywhere I went. The betrayal had become public, but somehow the blame was placed squarely on me. I'd always feared rejection, always dreaded disappointing people. Now it felt like the entire town had turned their backs simultaneously, choosing to believe whatever story Todd and Dad had fed them. I'd never felt so isolated. But what hurt the most was Joanne. One afternoon, desperate for some comfort, I walked into her bakery, hoping she'd at least listen. Instead, she greeted me with cautious politeness, awkwardly distant. Before I could say a word, she gently but firmly told me she didn't want to get involved in family problems. I left without speaking, the humiliation burning my face. Even Joanne, who'd always been my safe harbor, had been scared off by the scandal. Back at the store, Dad and Todd now openly ignored me, conducting business as if I weren't even there. Suppliers no longer called me. Employees whispered behind my back. My life, the only one I'd ever known, was collapsing around me, and nobody seemed to care. And yet, somewhere inside me, beneath the hurt, something began to harden. A quiet, fierce voice whispered that maybe this needed to happen. Maybe I'd had to lose everyone to finally stop trying to please them all. Still, knowing it didn't dull the pain of their rejection. Every cold stare, every whispered insult still cut deep. At night, lying alone in bed, tears would silently fall, born from loneliness, anger, betrayal, and beneath it all, grief. Not just for what I'd lost, but for the life I'd wasted waiting to be noticed, valued, respected. I knew I couldn't undo the damage they'd caused or change what people thought. But now, even in my isolation, I understood one crucial thing. Their opinions couldn't break me anymore. I used to think strength meant keeping quiet, holding it all in, being the steady one. I thought if I just worked harder, stayed loyal, stayed small, they'd eventually see me. That they'd say, "Thank you, Karen. We couldn't have done this without you." But they never did. That Sunday, I went into the store alone. The building felt colder than usual, the silence pressing in around me. I stood behind the counter where I'd stood thousands of times before, but something felt different. Something was gone, something in me. I walked to the office, opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, and stared at the foreclosure letters one last time. My name wasn't even on them. I wasn't even legally part of the disaster, just emotionally entangled in it. I'd given them my life, and they hadn't even included me in the downfall. And in that moment, something inside me settled. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't the problem. I was the only one who had actually shown up. The only one who cared enough to keep this place running when everyone else was cashing it out. They used me, not because they hated me, but because they knew I wouldn't fight back. I was dependable. I was loyal. I was silent. Not anymore. That night, I went home and opened my laptop. I started making a list, people to call, documents to gather, questions to ask. For the first time, I allowed myself to see the full picture. The debts, the manipulation, the false narrative they'd painted for the world and for me. I thought I'd feel overwhelmed, but instead, I felt calm. A strange calm that comes only when the worst has already happened, and all that's left is truth. And truth, even when it hurts, is cleaner than the lie I'd been living in for decades. I wasn't going to save the store for them anymore. I wasn't going to protect their reputation or my silence. If they wanted war, fine. I wouldn't raise my voice, but I'd tell the truth. And this time I wouldn't back down. I started with the suppliers. I called each one personally, voice steady, introducing myself not as Karen, Ray's daughter, but as the acting manager of Evans Hardware. I told them the truth about the debts, the internal sabotage, the broken trust. Some were shocked. A few hung up, but most listened. And more than a few thanked me. Then came the meeting. We called it a community transparency forum and held it in the back of the store on a Saturday afternoon. I expected maybe 5 or 6 people to show. Nearly 30 came. Neighbors, contractors, former employees, customers who'd stopped coming in, people who'd once believed we were a picture-perfect family. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply laid everything out. Proof of the loans, the inventory losses, the lies. I told them about the attempted secret sale, the mortgage, the silence I'd endured. I didn't beg for sympathy. I just told the truth. When I finished, there was silence. Heavy. But then someone clapped. And then another. And then the room filled with applause. Not loud, but sincere. Todd and Dad didn't show up. Of course they didn't. By then, they knew the storm was coming. I had already filed legal paperwork to freeze financial activity tied to the business. I had requested an independent audit. I'd also contacted a lawyer, one of the few in town who didn't owe Dad favors. The fallout was immediate. Word spread fast. People who'd once ignored me now looked me in the eye, apologized, asked what they could do. Joanne came to see me 2 days later, holding a lemon pie and tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," was all she said before hugging me. I forgave her. Honestly, I just needed to feel seen again. For the first time in years, I was no longer surviving, I was acting. Not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me powerful in a way I'd never known. And strangely, I didn't feel angry anymore. Just clear. Focused. Free. The days after the meeting moved like slow water, steady but irreversible. By the end of the month, it was done. Todd moved out of town, and Dad all but disappeared. Rumors said he went to stay with some distant cousin in Michigan. He never called. They left without apology.
No goodbyes, no explanations.
Just gone. At first, it hurt more than I expected. I kept thinking about childhood birthdays, old photos in dusty albums, the way Dad used to pat my head when I was little. I grieved, not for who they were now, but for who I thought they were. But grief has a way of clearing the air. I sold off the remaining inventory at fair prices and closed the store for 2 weeks. Not to give up, but to breathe. I painted the walls. I threw out boxes of junk. I took the faded Evans Family Hardware sign down and replaced it with a simple wooden one that read, "Karen's Tools and Supply." When I reopened, I expected silence. Instead, people trickled in, some bringing flowers, others just offering a smile. Old customers returned. Some even cried. They said they hadn't realized how bad things had gotten, that they were sorry for not seeing me sooner. I didn't need an apology, really. Just that moment. Just the recognition. That night, after closing up, I sat alone in the office. For the first time, it felt like mine. I poured a glass of wine, stared out the window at the empty parking lot, and let the silence hold me. I cried. Not out of sadness, but out of something softer. Relief, maybe. Or peace. I didn't get everything back. I'd lost family, time, trust. Some wounds will never fully heal. But in their place, something new had started to grow. Something real. Meaning. It's been 7 months now. The store isn't booming, but it's steady. Honest. I know every customer by name again. I greet them with my own smile, not one borrowed from obligation or fear. Some days are hard, money's tight, hours are long, but every moment feels like it belongs to me now. Joanne stops by most mornings with coffee and updates from the neighborhood. We don't talk about what happened. We don't need to. Our silence is comfortable now, not heavy. That's what rebuilding looks like. Small kindnesses, not grand apologies. I still get questions sometimes. People want the juicy story, what really went down between me and my family. I usually just smile and say, the truth came out. That's all. But in my heart, I know what really happened. I spent most of my life trying to be good enough.
For my father.
For my brother. For a town that saw what it wanted and ignored what it didn't. I gave everything: time, love, labor, silence. And they took it without thanks, without hesitation, without care. But I survived it. More than that, I'm still here.
Still standing. Still building.
And what I have now might be smaller, but it's mine. Every shelf I dust, every nail I restock, every evening I lock up, I do it for myself. Not for approval. Not for family. Just me. There's still grief. That part doesn't vanish.
But it no longer owns me.
It just rides along quietly, like an old scar that no longer aches. So here's my truth, for anyone who's been used, overlooked, silenced. You don't owe them your silence.
You don't owe them your life.
Start over. Even if your hands are shaking. Especially then.